The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Samuel Forrester rode his horse along the edge of Petaluma, California. Dust kicking up behind him as he urged his mount faster, trying to outrun the memories that haunted him like shadows. It was 1872, 3 years since the Transcontinental Railroad had been completed, but out here on the western frontier, progress moved as slowly as molasses in winter. The wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his piercing blue eyes couldn't shield him from the truth he was a man with nothing left to lose and nowhere else to go. The small ranch house appeared like a mirage against the darkening sky, its weathered exterior standing defiant against the wild landscape. Samuel had purchased its sight unseen 2 weeks prior, desperate for a fresh start after losing everything back in Missouri. At 32, he was older than most men starting over, but life had hardened him into someone who knew how to survive. His calloused hands gripped the reins tightly as he approached what was now his property, 10 acres of mostly uncultivated land with a small creek running through it. "This'll do," he muttered to himself as he dismounted, patting his chestnut mare's neck. "Just you and me now, Penny. We're fine alone." The house was sparse but solid. Samuel lit a lantern and surveyed his new kingdom, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bedroom in the back, and a lean-to addition that could serve as storage. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in months of drifting. He'd left behind a promising future when he departed Missouri, abandoning his position as a deputy sheriff after the incident that still visited him in nightmares. After settling Penny in the small stable attached to the house, Samuel unpacked his meager belongings. A few changes of clothes, his father's pocket watch, a worn Bible he rarely opened anymore, and his trusty Colt revolver. The weapon had saved his life more times than he could count, but it had also been the instrument of his downfall. He placed it carefully on the table, a reluctant companion he couldn't bear to part with. That night, Samuel slept fitfully on the bare mattress, dreams filled with gunfire and accusations. He awoke before dawn, sweat-soaked and breathing hard. The isolation that had seemed a blessing now felt oppressive in the darkness. But as the first light broke across the eastern sky, he steeled himself. This was his chance to rebuild, and he wouldn't waste it on regrets. The next morning, Samuel rode into Petaluma proper, a growing town that had benefited from both the gold rush and its position as an agricultural hub. The main street bustled with activity, merchants opening their shops, a stagecoach unloading passengers at the hotel, and ranch hands gathering at the saloon even at this early hour. New in town? The question came from a heavyset man sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store. Samuel nodded curtly. "Just bought the old Jenkins place." The man's eyebrows shot up. "That's been empty near 2 years now. I'm Walter Simmons, own this store here." "Samuel Forrester," he replied, extending a hand out of obligation more than friendliness. "What brings you to Petaluma, Mr. Forrester?" "Fresh start," Samuel said simply, unwilling to elaborate. Walter seemed to accept this, nodding sagely. "Well, you'll be wanting supplies then. Come on in." Inside the store, Samuel purchased essentials, food staples, ammunition, tools, and seeds for planting. He'd need to establish a garden if he hoped to be self-sufficient by winter. As Walter tallied his purchases, the bell above the door jingled, announcing another customer. "Morning, Mrs. Ashwood," Walter called out cheerfully. "How's little Thomas today?" Samuel turned, his eyes falling on a young woman who just entered. She was slender but strong-looking, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. A small child, perhaps a year old, rested on her hip, his tiny hand clutching the collar of her simple blue dress. "He's fussy today, Mr. Simmons. Hardly slept a wink last night, which means I didn't either." Her voice was melodious despite the weariness in it. She glanced at Samuel, a brief, assessing look before returning her attention to the shopkeeper. "Mrs. Ashwood, this here is Mr. Forrester, just bought the Jenkins place," Walter explained. The woman nodded politely. "Violet Ashwood. Welcome to Petaluma, Mr. Forrester." "Madam," Samuel replied with a respectful tip of his hat, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and the way she automatically bounced the child when he began to fuss. "The widow Ashwood runs the millinery shop down the street," Walter supplied, much to Samuel's discomfort. He had no interest in the town's personal stories or becoming entangled in its social web. Samuel quickly paid for his goods and loaded them onto Penny, eager to retreat to his solitude. But as he mounted his horse, he caught sight of Mrs. Ashwood emerging from the store, struggling to manage both her purchases and her squirming child. Without thinking, he dismounted and approached her. "Allow me," he said, reaching for her parcels. Surprise flickered across her face, but she relinquished the packages. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester." "That's very kind. Where can I take these for you?" "Just down to the end of the street, the shop with the blue awning." They walked in awkward silence, the child staring curiously at Samuel with wide eyes that reminded him of a clear summer sky. Outside the millinery shop, he handed the packages back to Violet, who had managed to calm the boy. "I appreciate your help," she said. "Not many gentlemen in town would bother." "It was nothing," Samuel replied stiffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Good day, Mrs. Ashwood." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Mr. Forrester, if you're in need of any linens or such for your new home, I'd be happy to offer a fair price." Samuel hesitated. He did need such items, but the thought of spending more time in town than necessary didn't appeal to him. Still, pragmatism won out. "I might take you up on that, madam." With a nod, he returned to his horse and headed back to his ranch, trying to ignore the lingering impression of Violet Ashwood's tired but determined eyes. The following days settled into a rhythm of hard work. Samuel repaired fences, cleared land for planting, and hunted to supplement his stores. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, and each night he collapsed into exhausted sleep, too tired even for nightmares. A week after his arrival, he was mending his roof when he spotted a wagon approaching. Instinctively, his hand moved to the revolver at his hip as he climbed down to meet the unexpected visitor. To his surprise, it was Violet Ashwood driving the wagon, her son secured beside her. She reined in the horses and offered a tentative smile. "Mrs. Ashwood," Samuel greeted her, relaxing his stance but remaining wary. "This is unexpected." "I hope I'm not intruding, Mr. Forrester," she said, "but Walter mentioned you bought quite a lot of supplies, yet no bedding or kitchen linens." "I've brought some samples of what I have in stock. Thought you might appreciate not having to make another trip to town so soon." Samuel was torn between annoyance at the intrusion and reluctant appreciation for her practical consideration. "That was thoughtful," he managed. Violet climbed down from the wagon, lifting Thomas after her. The boy had grown more alert since Samuel had last seen him, his eyes taking in everything with obvious curiosity. "Your son seems livelier today," Samuel observed, trying for politeness. Violet smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "He's had a few good nights' sleep. Makes all the difference in the world." She set Thomas down on a blanket she spread in the shade of the wagon. "Now, I've brought several options for bedding." As Violet displayed her wares, Samuel found himself studying her more closely. She couldn't be older than 25, yet there was a maturity in her bearing that spoke of hardship endured. Her wedding ring still adorned her finger, a thin gold band that had seen better days. How long have you been widowed, if you don't mind my asking?" The question escaped before he could reconsider its appropriateness. Violet's hand stilled momentarily on the quilt she was showing him. "Thomas was born 3 months after my husband died. It's been just over a year now." "I'm sorry for your loss," Samuel said, the words feeling inadequate. "And you, Mr. Forrester, what circumstances brought you to Petaluma alone?" Samuel tensed. "I prefer my privacy, Mrs. Ashwood." She nodded, accepting his boundary without offense. "Of course. Now about these linens." In the end, Samuel purchased more than he'd intended: a quilt, sheets, towels, and kitchen cloths. As he helped Violet load the unsold items back into her wagon, Thomas began to cry, his little face scrunching up in distress. Violet sighed, lifting him into her arms. "He's hungry and tired. We should head back. Would you like some water before you go?" Samuel offered, surprising himself. "For you and the boy." Gratitude flashed in Violet's eyes. "That would be most welcome, thank you." Inside his sparse home, Samuel became acutely aware of how little he had to offer a guest. He poured water into his only 2 cups, handing one to Violet and dipping a clean cloth into the other for Thomas to suck on. "You're good with children," Violet observed as Thomas calmed, happily gumming the damp cloth. Samuel froze, unwelcome memories flooding back. "I had a brother. Much younger. I helped raise him." "Had?" Violet inquired gently. "He's gone now." Samuel's tone made it clear the subject was closed. After finishing their water, Samuel escorted Violet and Thomas back to the wagon. As he helped her up onto the seat, their hands touched briefly, and Samuel was struck by how long it had been since he'd had such simple human contact. "Thank you for the business, Mr. Forrester," Violet said, gathering the reins, "and for your hospitality." Samuel nodded, stepping back. "Safe journey, Mrs. Ashwood." As he watched the wagon disappear down the dusty road, Samuel felt an unexpected pang of loneliness. He'd convinced himself that solitude was what he needed, but Violet Ashwood's brief visit had stirred something he thought long buried. That night, as he lay on his newly sheeted bed under the soft quilt that carried a faint scent of lavender, Samuel found himself thinking of the widow and her son. The boy's innocent eyes haunted him, so similar to another pair that had once looked up at him with trust and admiration. "Stop it," he muttered to himself, turning over restlessly. "We're fine alone." But the empty house seemed to mock him with its silence. Weeks passed, and Samuel threw himself into establishing his ranch. He acquired a few cattle, planted vegetables, and even built a chicken coop. Trips into town were rare and brief, though he found himself unconsciously slowing as he passed the millinery shop, sometimes catching glimpses of Violet through the window as she worked. One evening in late summer, a violent thunderstorm rolled over Petaluma. Samuel secured his animals and retreated indoors as lightning split the sky and rain pounded against his roof. The newly repaired structure held, but water still found its way in through a crack near the chimney, creating a steady drip onto his floor. The storm showed no signs of abating as night fell. Samuel was placing a bucket under the leak when he heard a frantic knocking at his door, barely audible over the thunder. Frowning, he grabbed his revolver and approached cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. "Mr. Forrester." "Please, it's Violet Ashwood." Samuel yanked open the door to find Violet on his porch, drenched to the skin and clutching a blanket-wrapped bundle to her chest. Her face was pale with fear, her hair plastered to her head. "Mrs. Ashwood." "What in God's name, please?" she interrupted, her voice breaking. "It's Thomas. He's burning with fever and the doctor's gone to a birthing in Santa Rosa. Our wagon wheel broke halfway here. I walked the rest. I didn't know where else to go." Samuel ushered her inside, his shock giving way to concern as he caught sight of the child's flushed face. Thomas's eyes were glassy, his breathing labored. "Put him on the bed," Samuel instructed, moving quickly to build up the fire. "How long has he been like this?" "It came on suddenly this afternoon," Violet said, unwrapping the boy and checking that he was still dry beneath the protective blanket. "He was fine this morning, then started burning up after his nap. I tried cold compresses, but nothing helped. When he began having trouble breathing, I knew I needed to get him to the doctor." Samuel approached the bed, placing a tentative hand on Thomas's forehead. "He's mighty hot. We need to cool him down." Working together, they bathed the child in cool water, Samuel tearing up one of his new towels to make compresses while Violet murmured soothing words to her son. Thomas whimpered but didn't fight their ministrations, which worried Samuel more than if the boy had struggled. "I've seen this before," Samuel said quietly as Violet replaced a compress on Thomas's chest. "My brother had something similar when he was about Thomas's age." Hope flickered in Violet's exhausted eyes. "What did you do?" "My mother made a tea from willow bark. Said it brought down the fever." Samuel hesitated. "I'm not sure if I remember exactly how." "Please try," Violet implored. "Anything that might help." Samuel nodded and went to work. He retrieved willow bark he'd collected for tanning leather and prepared it as he remembered his mother doing. The resulting brew was bitter, and Thomas resisted at first, but Violet managed to coax small sips into him. Through the long night, they took turns watching over the child. The storm continued to rage outside, making return to town impossible even if Thomas had been well enough to travel. In the quiet moments between checking the boy's temperature and replacing compresses, Samuel and Violet spoke in hushed tones. "You mentioned your brother," Violet said as they sat by the fire during one of Thomas's fitful periods of sleep. "What was his name?" Samuel stared into the flames. "Michael. He was 12 years younger than me. Our mother died birthing him, so he was largely my responsibility. That must have been difficult. I didn't think of it that way. He was everything to me." Samuel's voice roughened with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel anymore. Violet seemed to sense the pain behind his words. "What happened to him?" Samuel was quiet for so long that Violet thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "I was a deputy in a town in Missouri. Michael was 18, eager to follow in my footsteps. There was a bank robbery. I was inside when it happened, saw the gunman take aim at the teller. I fired first, but..." He swallowed hard. "Michael had come looking for me. He walked in at the wrong moment, stepped right into my line of fire." Violet's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and sympathy. "Oh, Samuel." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something about the intimacy of it broke through his carefully constructed walls. "I killed my own brother," he said, the words a confession he'd never spoken aloud. "After that, I couldn't stay. Couldn't face my father or the people in town. I just rode west and kept going until I ended up here." Violet reached across the space between them, laying her hand on his arm. "It was an accident, a terrible tragedy, but carrying this guilt won't bring him back." Samuel looked at her hand, then at her face, seeing no judgment there. "How did your husband die?" he asked, suddenly needing to know. "Trampled by a spooked horse," Violet replied, grief flashing across her features. "David worked at the livery stable. It was quick, they said, though that's small comfort. I was 6 months along with Thomas when it happened. You faced your share of hardship." "As has everyone in their own way," Violet said. "The question is whether we let it define us or find a way to move forward." Before Samuel could respond, Thomas began to cry, a weak, pitiful sound that brought them both instantly to his side. The boy's fever still raged, and his breathing had become more labored. "I'm scared," Violet whispered, clutching her son's tiny hand. Samuel felt a protectiveness surge through him, fierce and unexpected. "I won't let anything happen to him," he promised, though he had no right or means to guarantee such a thing. They continued their vigil as the storm gradually subsided, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Toward dawn, Thomas's fever broke at last, his skin cooling beneath their touch. The relief that washed over both adults was palpable, Violet collapsing into silent tears while Samuel stood awkwardly beside her, wanting to offer comfort but unsure how. As the first light of day filtered through the windows, Thomas opened his eyes, clear and alert for the first time in hours. He looked between his mother and Samuel, then reached a small hand toward the stranger who had helped save him. Without thinking, Samuel offered his finger, which Thomas grasped with surprising strength. Something shifted in Samuel's chest, a tightness he'd carried for 3 years beginning to loosen. "You should both rest," he said to Violet, gently extracting his finger from Thomas's grip. "Take the bed. I'll check on the animals and see about getting you back to town once you've slept." Violet looked ready to protest, but exhaustion won out. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." Samuel stepped outside into the fresh, rain-washed morning. The storm had left debris scattered across his property, but the damage seemed minimal. As he tended to the animals and began cleaning up, he found himself glancing frequently at the house, drawn by the knowledge of who slept within. By mid-morning, Violet emerged, looking rumpled but rested, Thomas propped on her hip. The boy's color had returned to normal, and he babbled happily, pointing at chickens pecking in the yard. "He seems much improved," Samuel observed, setting down the fence post he'd been replacing. "Thanks to you," Violet said warmly. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "You'd have found another way," Samuel assured her. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." A blush crept into Violet's cheeks. "Nevertheless, I'm grateful, we both are." Samuel cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I should get you back to town. People might worry." "Yes, of course." Was that disappointment in her voice? They traveled mostly in silence, Thomas secure between them on the wagon seat. Samuel had hitched up his own team after checking that Violet's wagon was indeed disabled. The wheel split beyond his ability to repair on the spot. As they approached Petaluma, Samuel became increasingly aware of the stares directed their way. A widow and a reclusive newcomer arriving together after a night away would certainly set tongues wagging. He'd inadvertently complicated Violet's life. "I'm sorry," he said abruptly, "for any gossip this might cause." Violet glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "People will talk regardless of what we do or don't do. I learned long ago not to base my decisions on others' opinions." They stopped outside her small house behind the millinery shop. Samuel helped her down from the wagon, handing Thomas to her before retrieving the few belongings they'd brought. "Mr. Forrester," Violet began, then corrected herself. "Samuel, would you like to come in for some coffee? It's the least I can offer after all you've done." Samuel hesitated, torn between the pull he felt toward this woman and the safety of his solitude. "I should get back. There's still storm damage to repair." Disappointment flashed across Violet's face, but she nodded. "Of course. Another time, perhaps." "Perhaps," he echoed, knowing even as he said it that he would find a reason to see her again. True to his unspoken promise, Samuel found himself in town more frequently over the following weeks. His visits to the millinery shop started with pretexts: another towel needed, a button requiring replacement, but soon evolved into regular occurrences, stopping by to check on Thomas's health or bringing small gifts. A wooden toy he'd carved, fresh eggs from his chickens. Violet welcomed him each time with increasing warmth, and Thomas grew accustomed to his presence, toddling to the door with excited babbles when he heard Samuel's voice. The boy was walking steadily now and attempting simple words, "Mama," chief among them. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Samuel invited Violet and Thomas to his ranch for Sunday dinner, an impulse he questioned immediately after extending the offer. His cooking skills were rudimentary at best, and his home, though improved with Violet's linens and a few other touches, remained Spartan. To his relief, Violet insisted on bringing most of the food, arriving with a basket laden with fried chicken, biscuits, and an apple pie that filled his house with a mouth-watering aroma. They ate outside at a rough table Samuel had constructed specifically for the occasion, watching Thomas chase butterflies in the grass. "He's growing so fast," Samuel remarked as the boy triumphantly held up a dandelion he'd picked. "Too fast," Violet agreed with a wistful smile. "Sometimes I wish I could keep him this small forever, innocent of the world's hardships." "You can't protect him from everything," Samuel said gently. "I know. But I can try to give him a good foundation, teach him to be kind and brave like his father was." Violet's eyes misted briefly. David would have been a wonderful father. Samuel felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, immediately followed by shame. "I'm sure he would have been." "What about you, Samuel? Did you ever think of having a family before?" The question caught him off guard. "Once, perhaps. There was a girl back in Missouri, but things didn't work out. After what happened with Michael, I couldn't imagine being responsible for anyone else." Violet studied him thoughtfully. "And now?" Samuel looked at Thomas, who had abandoned the dandelion and was now tottering toward them, his face alight with joy at his own mobility. "Now, I'm not so sure anymore." The moment hung between them, full of unspoken possibilities. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Samuel found himself drawn more and more to Violet and Thomas, the loneliness of his self-imposed exile increasingly unbearable in contrast to their company. He began helping at the millinery shop when business was slow, fixing shelves, and displaying a surprising talent for organization that made Violet tease him about missed opportunities as a shopkeeper. In turn, Violet brought life back to his ranch, suggesting improvements and sometimes implementing them herself when Samuel was occupied elsewhere. A curtain appeared in his window, a rug by his bed, small touches that transformed his house into something approaching a home. The first snow of winter fell early that year, blanketing Petaluma in white just before Thanksgiving. Samuel arrived at Violet's house with a turkey he'd shot, insisting on contributing to the holiday meal she'd invited him to share. "You didn't have to," Violet protested, but her pleasure at the gesture was evident in her smile. "I wanted to," Samuel replied simply. They prepared the meal together, moving around Violet's small kitchen in a domestic harmony that felt both foreign and deeply right to Samuel. Thomas watched from his chair, occasionally banging a wooden spoon against the table in apparent approval. As they sat down to eat, Samuel found himself studying Violet's face in the warm glow of lamplight. She'd worn her hair down for the occasion, the auburn waves framing features that had become dear to him in ways he was only beginning to acknowledge. "What is it?" Violet asked, catching his gaze. "You're beautiful," Samuel said before he could stop himself. Violet blushed, dropping her eyes. "You needn't flatter me, Samuel. It's not flattery, it's truth." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Violet, a crash from Thomas's direction interrupted whatever Samuel had been about to confess. The boy had managed to upset his cup, sending water cascading across the table. The moment broken, they both jumped up to clean the mess, laughing at Thomas's proud expression. Later, as Samuel prepared to leave, Violet walked him to the door, Thomas already asleep in his small bed. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It's been a long time since Thanksgiving felt like something to truly be thankful for." Samuel looked down at her, snowflakes drifting past the window behind her head like stars falling around her. Impulsively, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss that asked a question he wasn't brave enough to voice. Violet's initial surprise gave way to response, her hand coming up to rest against his chest as she returned the kiss with equal tenderness. When they parted, both were breathing a little faster, eyes wide with the newness of the feeling between them. "I should go," Samuel murmured, though everything in him wanted to stay. Violet nodded, her fingers still curled in the fabric of his shirt. "Will you come tomorrow?" "Try to stop me," he replied with a smile that felt unfamiliar on his face but entirely right. As Christmas approached, Samuel found himself contemplating a future he'd never dared imagine. The ranch was becoming profitable, his cattle herds slowly growing, and with each passing day, the weight of guilt he carried seemed a little lighter. He began to think of asking Violet a question that would change both their lives. One evening, after helping Violet close the shop, Samuel lingered longer than usual, playing with Thomas while Violet prepared dinner. The boy had taken to calling him Sam, one of the few clear words in his expanding vocabulary, and each time he heard it, Samuel's heart swelled with an emotion he was finally allowing himself to recognize as love. "He adores you," Violet observed as Thomas dozed off in Samuel's arms, exhausted from their game. "The feeling is mutual," Samuel replied, carefully rising to carry the sleeping child to his bed. When he returned to the main room, he found Violet standing by the window, watching the snow fall in the dim light of early evening. He approached quietly, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel turned her in his arms, needing to see her face. "Violet, I came to Petaluma thinking I needed to be alone, that I deserved to be alone after what happened. But you and Thomas. You've shown me there might be a way forward, a chance for happiness I didn't think was possible." Tears glistened in Violet's eyes. "Samuel, I love you," he said, the words falling from his lips with surprising ease. "Both of you, and if you'll have me, I want to make a life together." Violet's answer was in her kiss, fierce and certain, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "Is that a yes?" Samuel asked, a hint of his old vulnerability showing through. "Yes," Violet whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. They were married on New Year's Day, 1873, a small ceremony in the town church with Thomas toddling down the aisle ahead of his mother, clutching a ring pillow with fierce concentration. The townspeople who had once viewed Samuel with suspicion now welcomed him as one of their own, won over by the visible happiness he'd brought to Violet and her son. After the wedding, they moved to Samuel's ranch, which now boasted new furniture, a proper garden, and plans for expansion. Thomas took to ranch life with enthusiasm, trailing after Samuel as he tended the animals and worked the land. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came news that filled their home with even more joy. Violet was expecting a child. Samuel's initial panic at the responsibility quickly transformed into excitement as they prepared for the new addition to their family. "Will you be happy if it's another boy?" Violet asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the twilight. "I'll be happy with whatever God blesses us with," Samuel replied honestly. Boy or girl, this child will be loved beyond measure. Violet smiled, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. I think it's a girl, just a feeling. Then I'd better start practicing braiding hair, Samuel joked, earning a playful swat from his wife. As Violet's pregnancy progressed, Samuel found himself confronting old fears. What if something went wrong? What if he couldn't protect this growing family? The nightmares returned, though now they featured Violet and Thomas alongside Michael, all of them looking to him for a protection he failed to provide. One night, Samuel woke gasping from such a dream, sweat cooling on his skin despite the summer heat. Beside him, Violet stirred, reaching out to touch his arm. "Samuel, what is it?" He couldn't bring himself to answer, climbing out of bed instead and going to check on Thomas, a ritual that often calmed him after these episodes. The boy slept peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that usually soothed Samuel's frayed nerves. But tonight, as he watched, Thomas began to whimper in his sleep, his little face scrunching up in distress. "No," the child murmured, tossing his head. "No, bad man, no." Samuel froze, recognizing the signs of a nightmare. He'd experienced enough of them himself to know the torment they could bring. Gently, he placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, murmuring soft reassurances until the boy settled. When he returned to the bedroom, Violet was sitting up, concern etched across her features in the dim lamplight. "Is Thomas all right?" "Having a bad dream," Samuel replied, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "He's settled now." Violet studied him intently. "And you, what woke you?" Samuel ran a hand through his hair. "Same old demons. I worry sometimes that I'm not, that I can't be what you and Thomas need, what this new baby will need." "Oh, Samuel." Violet moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You are everything we need. Thomas adores you, and this baby will too. You're not alone in this." "I've told myself we're fine alone for so long," Samuel confessed. "Even after Thomas came into my life, I kept thinking I could handle everything by myself, that I didn't need anyone. But seeing him cry in his sleep just now, I realized I can't protect him from everything, just like you said, and it terrifies me." "That's what it means to love someone," Violet said softly, "to accept that fear and move forward anyway." Samuel turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "When did you get so wise?" Violet smiled, the curve of her lips gentle in the soft light. "I've had good teachers, grief, love, a certain stubborn cowboy who showed me it was possible to begin again." Samuel leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you." "Deserve has nothing to do with it," Violet replied. "Love isn't earned, Samuel. It's given freely, and I choose to give mine to you every day." In the quiet that followed, Samuel felt something long broken inside him begin to heal. He wasn't alone anymore, and perhaps he never had to be again. The summer progressed, bringing abundant harvests and expanding business opportunities. Samuel's small herd grew as neighboring ranchers recognized his skill and integrity. Violet's millinery shop, now managed by a capable young woman from town while Violet focused on her pregnancy, continued to thrive. Thomas grew too, not just in height but in vocabulary and understanding. He called Samuel Pa now, a development that had first occurred spontaneously one morning as they fed the chickens together. Samuel had been so overcome with emotion that he'd had to turn away, pretending to adjust his hat while he composed himself. As Violet entered her 8th month, preparations for the baby accelerated. Samuel built a cradle, lovingly carving details into the wood during the evenings. Violet sewed tiny clothes and blankets, sometimes with Thomas helping by tangling the thread. One hot August night, Samuel woke to find Violet's side of the bed empty. Concerned, he rose and found her in the kitchen, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other gripping the back of a chair. "Violet, what's wrong?" She turned to him, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. "The baby's coming," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "It's too early, Samuel." A cold dread settled in Samuel's stomach, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I'll get Thomas up and ready. We need to get you to town, to the doctor." Moving with controlled urgency, Samuel woke Thomas, explaining in simple terms that the baby was coming and they needed to help Mama. The boy, sleepy but sensing the gravity of the situation, cooperated fully, allowing Samuel to dress him quickly. Within half an hour they were in the wagon, headed for Petaluma through the dark night. Violet lay in the back on a makeshift bed of blankets, her face tightening with pain at increasingly frequent intervals. Thomas sat beside Samuel on the driver's seat, unusually quiet, his small hand clutching Samuel's sleeve. "Pa," he said suddenly as they neared town. "Mama be okay," Samuel swallowed hard. "Yes, son. Mama and the baby will be just fine. The doctor will help them." The conviction in his voice was more for Thomas's benefit than from any certainty he felt, but as he spoke the words, Samuel found himself believing them. Violet was strong, far stronger than she appeared. She would fight for herself and their child with everything she had. The doctor was mercifully at home when they arrived, quickly taking charge of the situation. Samuel was ushered out of the examination room with Thomas, left to pace the hallway while Violet's cries of pain filtered through the closed door. "Would you like me to take the boy?" The doctor's wife, a kindly older woman, appeared with an offer of respite. Samuel looked down at Thomas, who had fallen asleep against his leg, exhausted by the night's drama. "No, thank you. I need him with me." Hours passed, each seeming longer than the last. Dawn broke over Petaluma, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Samuel barely noticed. Finally, when he thought he might wear a path in the floorboards with his pacing, the door opened and the doctor emerged, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Forrester," he began, and Samuel's heart lodged in his throat. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question. The doctor's face broke into a smile. "Mother and daughter are both doing remarkably well, considering the circumstances. Your wife is a fighter, Mr. Forrester, and it seems your daughter has inherited that quality." Relief washed over Samuel in a wave so powerful his knees nearly buckled. "A daughter? We have a daughter." "Indeed you do. A small one to be sure, but with a healthy set of lungs. You can see them now, if you'd like." Samuel lifted the still sleeping Thomas into his arms and followed the doctor into the room where Violet lay propped against pillows, her face flushed but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in white linen. "Samuel," Violet whispered as he approached, "meet your daughter." Samuel set Thomas gently on the foot of the bed and moved to Violet's side, peering down at the impossibly small face nestled against her breast. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and skin still red from the effort of being born. As he watched, she opened her eyes, revealing irises of deep blue that seemed to look straight through him. "She's perfect," he breathed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch her cheek. Violet smiled tiredly. "I thought we might call her Hope. It seems fitting." "Hope," Samuel repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that's perfect." Thomas stirred then, blinking awake and immediately crawling up the bed to see what had captured his parents' attention. "Baby?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, Thomas," Violet said gently. "This is your sister, Hope. You're a big brother now." Thomas studied the infant solemnly before pronouncing, "She's small." Samuel laughed, the sound reflecting the joy bubbling up inside him. "She is now, but she'll grow, and you'll help us take care of her, won't you?" Thomas nodded with all the seriousness a 2-year-old could muster. "Help? The doctor recommended that Violet and Hope remain in town for a few days to ensure their health, given the early arrival. Samuel arranged for them to stay in rooms above the millinery shop, promising to return each day from the ranch with Thomas. That first night back at the ranch without Violet felt strange, the house too quiet, despite Thomas's presence. After putting his son to bed, Samuel sat on the porch, staring at the stars and reflecting on the whirlwind his life had become. 3 years ago, he'd been a broken man, convinced he deserved nothing but solitude and regret. Now he was a husband, a father to 2 children, and the owner of a prospering ranch. The change was so profound it sometimes left him breathless. The next morning, Samuel woke to find Thomas standing beside his bed, eyes wide and frightened. "What's wrong, son?" Samuel asked, immediately alert. "Bad dream," Thomas whispered. "Man hurt Mama and Hope." Samuel lifted the boy onto the bed, holding him close. "It was just a dream, Thomas. Mama and Hope are safe in town and we'll see them today." "Promise." "I promise," Samuel assured him. "No one will hurt our family." The conviction in his voice surprised him, a protective ferocity he hadn't known himself capable of anymore. For so long, he'd believed he could protect no one, that his attempts would only lead to tragedy. But holding Thomas, feeling the child's trust in his arms, Samuel knew with certainty that he would do everything to keep his family safe. After breakfast, they rode into town, Thomas secure before Samuel on the saddle. The boy's excitement to see his mother and sister had banished the lingering shadows of his nightmare, his chatter filling the morning air as they traveled. They found Violet sitting up in a chair by the window, Hope asleep in a bassinet beside her. The transformation in Violet since the previous day was remarkable. Color had returned to her cheeks, and though she still moved carefully, there was a strength in her bearing that reassured Samuel. Thomas scrambled from Samuel's arms the moment they entered, rushing to peer into the bassinet with barely contained excitement. "Hope, wake up," he commanded in a stage whisper that made both adults smile. "She needs her sleep, just like you do," Violet explained, drawing him onto her lap for a kiss. "She'll wake up soon enough, and then you can hold her if you're very gentle." Samuel knelt beside Violet's chair, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "How are you feeling?" "Better today," she assured him. "The doctor says we're both doing well, though he wants us to stay until the end of the week just to be certain." Samuel nodded, relieved. "I've arranged everything at the ranch. Mrs. Peterson from next door will help with the chickens, and I've hired young Billy Thompson to handle the cattle for a few days so I can be here with you." Gratitude shone in Violet's eyes. "You've thought of everything." "I try," Samuel said simply. They spent the day together as a family, Samuel and Thomas taking turns holding Hope when she woke, marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she seemed to study their faces with solemn concentration. When Thomas grew restless, Samuel took him for a walk around town, using the opportunity to purchase supplies they would need for the journey home at the end of the week. As promised, Samuel stayed in town, sleeping on a cot in the room adjoining Violet's. Each night, he would check on both his wife and daughter before retiring, the sight of them sleeping peacefully filling him with a contentment he'd never thought to experience again. On their final night in town, Samuel woke to a sound that cut through his sleep like a knife. Hope's cry, different somehow from her usual fussing. He was on his feet instantly, moving to the adjoining room where Violet had already risen to attend to the baby. "What's wrong?" he asked, lighting a lamp. Violet turned to him, concern etched across her features. "She's burning up, Samuel." The words sent ice through his veins as he remembered Thomas's illness months earlier. He placed a hand on Hope's forehead, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her tiny body. "I'll get the doctor," he said, already reaching for his boots. The night that followed was a blur of fear and desperate hope as the doctor examined the infant, his expression grave as he explained that such fevers in newborns could be extremely dangerous. He prescribed a treatment of cool compresses and a medicine that he warned might not be enough. "The next 24 hours will be critical," he told them as dawn approached. "Keep her cool, try to get her to take the medicine, and pray." Samuel, who had avoided prayer since Michael's death, found himself silently bargaining with God as he watched Violet cradle their feverish daughter. Thomas, awakened by the commotion, sat quietly in a corner, his eyes huge with worry. "Come here, son," Samuel said, lifting Thomas onto his lap. "Hope is sick like you were when you had the fever. Do you remember?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "You made me better." "That's right. And now we're going to help Hope get better too, but we need to be very brave and very patient." As the day wore on, Hope's condition seemed to worsen. She refused to nurse, her cries growing weaker, and the fear in Violet's eyes mirrored the dread in Samuel's heart. The doctor returned at midday, making no effort to hide his concern at the baby's deteriorating state. "There's little more I can do medically," he admitted. "At this point, it's in God's hands." After he left, Violet broke down, sobbing against Samuel's chest as he held her. "I can't lose her, Samuel, I can't." "You won't," Samuel promised, though he had no right to make such assurances. "We won't." That evening, as Hope's breathing became increasingly labored, Samuel found himself alone with his daughter while Violet finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling into a fitful sleep with Thomas curled beside her. Picking up the infant, Samuel cradled her against his chest and walked to the window, staring out at the stars that had witnessed so much of his life's journey. "Hope," he whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms, "your mama named you well, because that's what you brought to our lives. Before Thomas, before your mother, I had none. I was just existing, not living." His voice caught, tears he'd held back all day finally escaping. "Please don't leave us. Please fight. We need you, all of us." To his surprise, Hope's eyes fluttered open, those deep blue orbs seeming to focus on his face. Her little hand escaped the blanket, fingers grasping at air until Samuel offered his own finger, which she gripped with surprising strength. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended words. Samuel felt it like a physical sensation, a promise from his daughter that she would not give up without a fight. Through the night, Samuel refused to leave Hope's side, continuing to bathe her small body with cool cloths and coaxing the medicine between her lips whenever possible. Violet woke to find him still vigilant at dawn, Hope nestled against his chest. "Any change?" she asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. Samuel looked down at their daughter, noticing for the first time that her breathing seemed easier, her skin less flushed. I think the fever might be breaking." Violet was at his side instantly, her hand going to Hope's forehead. "You're right," she breathed, tears of relief springing to her eyes. "She feels cooler." When the doctor arrived an hour later, his examination confirmed their observations. "The crisis has passed," he announced, his relief evident. "She's not out of danger completely, but if she continues to improve at this rate, I believe she'll make a full recovery." The next few days were filled with cautious optimism as Hope grew stronger, her appetite returning and her periods of alertness increasing. By the end of the week, the doctor declared her well enough to travel home to the ranch, with instructions for continued care. The journey back was taken at a gentle pace, Samuel driving the wagon with exaggerated care over every bump and rut in the road. Thomas sat proudly beside him, appointed guardian of his sister's bassinet, while Violet rested in the back, still recovering her own strength. As they approached their property, Samuel felt a surge of emotion at the sight of the ranch house, its weathered exterior now representing not isolation but sanctuary. This was home, not just a place to exist but a place to live and love and grow together. That night, after Thomas and Hope were both asleep, Samuel and Violet sat on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder as they listened to the symphony of night sounds around them. "I was so afraid," Violet admitted softly. "Not just for Hope, but for you. I feared losing her might break you, might make you retreat back into yourself." Samuel considered this, surprised to realize she was right to worry. Before this family, such a loss might indeed have destroyed him. "I can't promise I wouldn't have struggled," he said honestly. "But I wouldn't have left you and Thomas to face it alone. We're a family now, in joy and in sorrow." Violet tilted her face up to his. "When I first met you, you were so determined to be alone. What changed?" Samuel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You showed me I was wrong. That night with Thomas's fever, when you asked why he was crying in his sleep even though I insisted we were fine alone. You made me see that being alone isn't the same as being fine." "And now?" Violet asked, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Now I know that fine isn't enough." "I don't want to be fine, Violet. I want to be happy, terrified, exhausted, overjoyed, all of it, as long as it's with you and our children." As autumn returned to Petaluma, bringing with it the anniversary of Samuel's arrival, the ranch flourished in ways he could never have anticipated. The cattle herd had doubled, the vegetable garden yielded abundantly, and most importantly, his family thrived within the walls of what was now truly a home. Hope grew into a sturdy, curious infant, her initial frailty giving way to robust health that sometimes exhausted her parents with its energy. Thomas, now 3, had appointed himself her protector and entertainer, a role he took very seriously despite occasional lapses when toys were not willingly shared. One crisp October evening, as golden light bathed the land in warmth, Samuel stood at the edge of his property, surveying all he had built. Behind him, he heard the familiar sound of Violet's footsteps, followed by the patter of Thomas's feet and the soft cooing of Hope in her mother's arms. "Penny for your thoughts," Violet said as she reached his side, the gentle teasing in her voice a comfort he never tired of. Samuel turned to face his family, his heart full to bursting at the sight of them, Violet with her hair loose around her shoulders, Hope balanced on her hip, and Thomas grinning up at him with unabashed adoration. "I was just thinking about beginnings," he replied, reaching out to ruffle Thomas's hair. "About how sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the start of something better than you could have imagined." Violet's eyes softened with understanding. "Are you happy, Samuel? Truly?" Samuel gathered Thomas into his arms, then drew Violet and Hope into his embrace. The weight of them against him, solid and real and precious, was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway, a truth he once thought he'd never feel again. "More than I ever thought possible," he said. "We're not just fine, we're blessed beyond measure." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and promise, Samuel Forrester held his family close, no longer a man alone but part of something far greater than himself. The ghosts of his past had not vanished entirely. They never would, but they had receded, making room for the joy of the present and the hope of the future. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound carrying across the land that had once seemed so empty but now pulsed with life and possibility. Samuel smiled, recognizing in that wild call an echo of his own journey from desolation to belonging. "Let's go home," he said to his family, the words a benediction and a vow. And together, they walked toward the house aglow with lamplight, no longer a refuge from the world but a center from which their love radiated outward, strong enough to weather whatever storms might come, resilient enough to nurture the dreams they were only beginning to dream.